process.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Chair, we don't have our mic. And do we have the capacity to record?
We're using the mic in the middle.
Okay.
Okay. We'll go to the next agenda item, which is call to audience. Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Chair, we do not have anybody that signed up to speak.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to item 4, which
Chair?
is, yes.
Just a question. Do we have any written comments? Because I know that is allowed.
Yes.
Any written comments, and when do you, board members?
We have not received any written comments, and when we do, we will share that with this board.
I will go to item 4, which is approval of the January 27, 2022 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Seconded by Mayor Murphy. There was an amendment from, is that included in this?
Oh, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Scott wanted to recommend an amendment. You have a copy of that next to your packet there. And
Agreeable to? Yes. We'll add the amendment to the motion made by Mayor Honey, seconded by Councilor Mayor Murphy, excuse me.
that's okay.
And any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
None, all in- Yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is Supervisor Scott. Just wanted to say that I appreciate the amendment being included in the minutes. I went back and I watched that portion of the meeting, and I really appreciate that Jackie puts a link to the portion of the meeting in each section of the minutes that it pertains to. And it just felt to me that the amendment, the language of the amendment more accurately captured the dialogue that occurred during that time, especially if you go to the 37 minute and 30-second point when Mayor Winfield starts talking about the two different motions and the dialogue between Mayor Murphy and General Maxwell. I just felt that my amendment more accurately reflected what we decided. So I appreciate it being included.
Thank you, Supervisor Scott. We appreciate your careful review of the minutes and adding the amendment. Any additional discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Ayes have it. We'll go to item 5, which is the consent agenda item. This is for information. Are there any of these particular items that members of the council would like to have discussed? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Move approval, Mr.
So motion made by Mayor Honey, seconded by Chairman Jacopicio. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Ayes have it. We'll go to item 6, legislative update on proposed transportation-related legislation. Mr. Zenda will make a presentation. Thank you, Mr. Zenda.
Good afternoon. Always a privilege and a pleasure to be speaking to you all today regarding one of my favorite topics, legislative updates. Once again, I'm David Zenda, Policy Analyst here at Pima Association of Governments. So according to my reckoning, it is day 74 of the second regular session of the 55th Arizona State Legislature. So in theory, we're going to be about 3/4 of the way through. As of earlier today, a whopping 1,764 bills have been posted, 94 have since passed, 52 have been signed into law. The deadline has already passed for members to introduce any new bills. Earlier in February, the House began considering bills that originated in the Senate, and the Senate considered bills that were originating from the House. The final day that each chamber can consider bills from the other chamber will actually be tomorrow, March 25th. From there, April 15th is going to be the last day for conference committees. Now, the session normally lasts about 100 days, and April 23rd marks the Saturday of the week of the 100th day of the session. A lot of numbers in there, I know, but this is the date required by rule for sine die adjournment unless leaders extend the deadline. Leadership can extend the deadline no more than 7 days, and thereafter, any extension requires a majority vote in each house. At the governor's discretion, a special session could be called. As the session winds to a close, greater focus and effort will likely turn to the state budget via the General Appropriations Act and other capital outlay and budget reconciliation bills. Last year, if you recall, the budget legislation really didn't get moving until May and was not signed into law until late June, literally at the last minute. Several transportation funding bills will likely see success or failure via these appropriations bills because they are appropriations bills and will be included in the discussions for the larger budget process. Many have already gone through both chambers of the legislature with some pretty significant and encouraging support. It's a good sign for eventual inclusion in the budget when these appropriations bills are well received in the chambers to which they are assigned. So with that in mind, here are a couple of them that we are following. The first, and likely the most significant one for our region, will be House Bill 2728, which is appropriations to ADOT for Tier 2 studies. This will be covered in the next agenda item, but just a couple of remarks. This, of course, provides $14 million in funding for a Tier 2 study in the Sonoran Corridor here in Pima County, and also $25 million for I-11 in Maricopa County, and $19 million, now actually $14 million, for the North-South Corridor in Pinal County, following a recent amendment. This bill did pass the House with pretty encouraging support, 56-3 in late February, and passed out of Senate Appropriations Committee last week or 2 weeks ago, March 16th. So it may not progress any further, but could be then a part of the budget discussions. Once again, this is an encouraging sign that it's gone through both committees, or both chambers with support. Senate Bill 1148 affects the vehicle license tax sales price. Of course, this is one of the funds that our region gets for transportation projects, in particular Pima County. Changes to VLT, according to this law, would be based on the actual sales price of the car instead of how it is now currently done based on MSRP. So this effectively will benefit you if you're pretty good at bargaining for the price of your car and then you end up paying less of a sales tax. For that reason, the legislature, or legislative analysis, suggests that this would reduce VLT revenues for the state by about $70 million annually. This bill did pass out of the Senate, looks like this week, 16-13, and is now headed for the House, and at least according to my most recent glancing over it, I haven't seen a scheduled hearing quite yet. Senate Bill 1239, 1239, is an appropriation to widen I-10, appropriating a chunky $400 million from the general fund to the ADOT to widen I-10 between Chandler and Casa Grande. This bill also passed pretty enthusiastically in the Senate, 27-1, and was assigned to and passed out of the House Transportation and Appropriations Committee on March 9th and March 17th, respectively. Our friends up at MAG, or kind of the greater Maricopa County area, are putting through a couple bills with support from the legislature. Of course, House Bill 2598 and its twin bill in the Senate, Senate Bill 1356, which is their version of the RTA. The House version of the bill appears to be stuck in the House for a variety of reasons after passing out of committee. The Senate version of the bill passed out of the Senate 21-9 and was referred to the House Transportation Committee on March 17th. I haven't seen any movement yet for that. Earlier this week, there was a strike everything amendment, which substituted basically the entire language of that bill onto another unrelated piece of legislation. So there are at least three moving parts going on with this bill. House Bill 2701 regards the transaction privilege tax, which of course could affect our RTA revenues, in particular for prime contracting. This is going to reduce the tax base for prime contracting classification of transaction privilege tax to 60%, down from 65, for the next fiscal year, beginning in, 1 year from now, July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024. And then after that, it would go down to 55%, once again down from 65%. Consulting Mr. DeGrood, it may affect RTA revenues by a few hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, but we're not talking millions or anything terribly large for now. This bill did pass out of the House 31-28 in late February and was referred to the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee. I'm not sure of the status since then. Okay, one more on the state side. So Senate Bill 1004 is another transaction privilege tax bill, this one dealing with remote sellers. This is a strike everything amendment, and essentially it's going to extend tax reciprocity as another state tax agency extends custody for remote seller administration. But the relevant point for us is going to be it will change how TPT is applied for these online sellers. If we, for the first 100,000 in taxable sales instead of gross sales, which might have some fiscal impact on the general fund because taxable sales are often less than gross sales. The Committee of the Whole recently approved this, and I haven't seen much movement since. Kind of wraps up on the state, just a couple of remarks at the federal level. I believe it was last week, 2 weeks ago, House Resolution 2471, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, passed both House and Senate and was signed into law by the President. So this provides funding for the entire federal government at increased levels from the previous fiscal year. More importantly, it completely funds the entire Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, including all the new programs within it. Before we were IIJ people wandering aimlessly through a almost FAST Act world, as it were. We didn't have the funding for this new bill. Now we do. So this bill marks also, important to note, this bill is going to mark return of earmarks for the first time in 10 years. Although the PAG region does receive some earmarks in this Appropriations Act, none of them appear to be transportation related. There are a few with housing and urban development. On March 14th, FHWA was provided supplementary tables to ADOT that prescribed sub-allocations for our new federal funding with this new bill across Arizona, which would in theory include us in the PAG. We haven't seen those yet. I think they're still working for it. FHWA is also calculating each state's funding level, which relates to its obligation authority. And we're still awaiting more rules and guidance on those matters. ADOT reports that FHW estimates should have these funding calculations done by April, so that should be coming up very soon. And as we know more about further rules, further guidance, and actual dollar amounts, we'll be sure to let you know. The only other thing I'll briefly mention is there has been a lot of talk recently of a gas tax holiday, both at the state and federal level. At the state level, you currently pay about 18 cents per gallon in tax. The governor is currently opposed to altering this whatsoever, and of course this would directly affect our revenue, most likely. There is some mixed reception at the federal level where gas has an 18.4 cent tax on every gallon. If, in theory, the federal government were to do away with this, this would decrease revenues into the Highway Trust Fund, which funds a lot of our infrastructure programs, by about $3 to $4 billion each month, according to the Center for Transportation. However, the current bill that's really pushing the movement for this, Senate Bill 3609, would not only suspend the gas tax, but transfer money from the general fund into the Highway Trust Fund to. That concludes my legislative updates, unless there are any questions.
Mahoney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the TPT tax, you said it had passed out of the House to the Senate?
Yes, House Bill 2701 that deals with TPT and prime contracting. This one did pass out of the House in late February, was referred to the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee, and when I checked this morning, I didn't see any action in this committee.
Right. I mean, so I'm a Republican and I'm not a big tax guy, but new growth, that's one way that a lot of our fast-growing communities are able to pave streets and hire police officers and do things we need to do. Is, if you take a source of income away from us, then do we have to look for another source of income? I'm kind of concerned, but, so it's still in what committee is it in? the Senate?
It's in both the Senate Finance and Appropriations.
I have another comment that kind of relates to this too. The Supreme Court in Arizona has struck down the RTA in Pinal County. The PRTA, they call it, Pinal RTA. The way it was set up, they've had it in effect for a year or more and have already collected $84 million. And I talked to Christian Price, if he could catch his breath long enough at the ADOT meeting in Marana last week, but Price from Maricopa. This could have a big impact on what the state does as well, because a lot of the projects that the state is funding rely on RTA projects to be a partner, interchanges or major roadways and stuff. Anyway, Pinal County, as of that court date, does not have an RTA. And they have to reimburse all the money, $84 million. And they're trying to figure out how to do it. You have to reimburse it to the stores or the big businesses that collect it. I don't know how it gets back to the people. It may not get back to the people. The RTA news for our friends to the north of Pinal County, their RTA is no longer in existence.
If I may, back to Mayor Tony's conversation of the prime tax thing, obviously it's an outstanding policy. I would, at your direction, oppose that bill. Unless you want to make a motion to that fact, we are definitely concerned about it.
Would that be appropriate under this
Yes, sir.
presentation?
Yes, sir, if you'd like to make a motion.
I would like to make that motion then.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The ayes have it. Any other questions for Mr. Zenda before we move on to the next agenda? Okay, Mayor Romero?
Mayor, I don't, have a question per se, it's just I wanted to brief, for part of the discussion, that, as we all know, the deadline for the U.S. Department of Transportation rates, discretionary grants are coming up pretty soon. And I thought that, during this legislative update, we could, take this opportunity to make a motion that PAG issue letters of support to all of the jurisdictions that are applying for raise, grants, so that if Marana's applying, if Oro Valley's applying, if Altam or Pasayaque or Tucson, any one of us is applying for any of the raise grants, that the PAG issue letters of support to all jurisdictions. Would that be appropriate to make at this time?
Madam Mayor, I'm not sure, that's not specific to the agenda item. We'll be happy to support any project if it's actions of the region. Typically any project that has already been in the RMAP as well as the all eligible for support. Motion, if you like, we can the agenda item at the next meeting, but not knowing specifically which projects, I think.
The deadline to apply for these grants are April 14th, and there might be some projects regionally that are not under the RMAP, or that could potentially help the region in terms of bringing federal funds. So I'm wondering if we could either make a motion or give the explicit direction that all jurisdictions should receive letters of support. Any way we can bring federal funds to our region is good.
Mr. Chair? In general, I certainly, one of my concerns, that would be for Thomas, is legislative update, so I'd be concerned if it's not been agendized, the public hasn't had the opportunity to weigh in. The other point is, even if it was done, I guess I'd want a little understand a little bit more, because it feels like a blanket, letter of support, from us without actually knowing what projects necessarily. But I guess my biggest concern is it wasn't agendized, so I didn't know.
But sure, members of council, it really isn't agendized. Yeah.
I'll drop my motion, but, I think we should have an ethos of supporting all projects that are, they're going for requests for federal funds for any of our jurisdictions. That's a general good thing. I don't think this could affect us in a negative way. But if our attorney feels that it's not agendized, then we're perfectly fine with.
Right, agreement? Yeah, in every place. Right, thank you for the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Senda, for your presentation. Go to item 7, Mr. Ellis. The Sonoran Corridor Tier 2 funding opportunity.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the council. You heard Mr. Zinda allude to HB 2728 and its reference to the Sonoran Corridor. So since that's of critical nature and interest down here, wanted to provide you a little recap on where we're at, where the state's progressed, and where things kind of currently stand now. So it's a little bit of background. In January of 2015, this body had passed a resolution basically supporting the backing of a definition or a designation of a roadway from I-19 to I-10 for freight, general mobility, accessibility, and essentially then asking the state to define that as a state highway. That was subsequently, in March of 2016, then approximately a year later, the designation of State Route 410, and then the programming of funds to allow ADOT to proceed with a Tier 1 environmental impact statement was then approved and underway. So, after several years of all the activity associated with that, all the analysis, the evaluation, the public outreach, and all the necessary efforts that were associated with that, essentially the activities have concluded with the issuance, the final environmental impact statement was approved, was finalized, and then the issuance of the record of decision associated with that action. That was completed late last year. What happened out of all that, or what came out of all that, was a selected alternative that goes from essentially I-19 in the vicinity of El Toro Road, goes to the east, to the Alvernon Way extension alignment, runs north-south from there, all the way up to connect into the vicinity of Alvernon and the Aerospace Parkway, and then turns east to connect in over to I-10 in the vicinity of Rita Road. So essentially it provides that bypass, but at the same time that connectivity to the airport area that was so richly desired and identified as a critical need for the area. So that was then established. That's the selected alternative that now has been captured in those documentation in that effort. As part of that, it also includes a phased implementation. So basically, it's a suggested way of building this. Essentially, the price tag for this overall effort is around $1 billion, a little bit shy of that. Obviously, breaking it into manageable pieces, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that was identified as to necessary as to how we move forward. As you heard Mr. Zinda talk about right now, this project is included in the discussions going on with HB 2728, along with 2 other major environmental impact studies that are being done by ADOT. So continuation of the funding will allow it to continue to move forward. Key things, though, here that are necessary to keep in mind as this moves forward. From a process standpoint, Tier 2, which would be the next level of detail. Essentially, the Tier 1, as you recall from previous presentations, takes about a half-mile bandwidth for the overall corridor, and then refines it down to, in the Tier 2 effort, to the designated about 400 to 500 feet worth of right-of-way, where the actual roadway would go, and then quantifying the associated impacts and identifying the necessary design elements to go with it. So key things on that process part of it that are critical for us, this group to know. It's consistent with the fiscally constrained transportation long-range plan. It's part of your RMAP, so you got to make sure that that's included in there, which it is. Also, at least one of the subsequent phases then has got funding identified to it, either continued design or right-of-way or construction. essentially can't tackle the tier 2 without saying, I have something else to follow up with it. We're gonna take action later on. And lastly, that the funding is in there, to advance the project. The appropriate amount, the source is designated, so that we're now acting forward instead of, well, it's just speculated, or it's identified, but it's not secured yet. From a logistics standpoint, as I mentioned, that the phased implementation plan was included in there as kind of a suggestion on there, and there's 3 segments that have been identified. As you can see up there, it's kind of broken into the 3 main pieces. The one up at the top that goes east-west from essentially the Aerospace Parkway over to Rita Road. Then the north-south segment that would connect that down to Sahuarita, and then the southern piece that would then connect from I-19 over to that connection as well. That's suggested. So if that needs to be altered, if there's a performance aspect that's determined, such as maybe it'd be better to have the southern piece in before the big alignment north-south, those evaluations can take place. The key thing that's got to be noted in there is that it has to be independent utility. You have to connect to things. It has to work by itself. It can't, well, it's dependent on the next something else. You have to make sure that it can stand alone and operate as effectively. Second piece is that it's got logical termini. You can't just dead end it. You've got to connect from one piece to another to make sure it gets that whole functional performance aspect of it. And as part of that, it's critical to note that Tier 2, the environmental impact studies, have a shelf life of 3 years. So you have to make sure you're acting on that, otherwise then a reevaluation is needed afterwards. So in summary, PAG region has long supported the advancement of this and the conclusion and the efforts that have come out of this. So we know we've got good standing in what we've identified, what we've got, and what's been accomplished to date. The milestone of having a Tier 1 EIS is a critical major element that's allowed this then to progress and now be considered for future actions on there. Tier 2, as I talked about, the necessary components have got to be included in there with the money, with the phasing on that, with those identified necessary functional performance aspects of it. HB 2728 does include this in there, as Mr. Zinda presented. It's important to note that if that does fail, though, there is currently no funding identified for it to move it forward. However, the project has been included with the RTA's call for projects and is under there for consideration by the Citizens Advisory Committee. With that, Mr. Chair, I can answer any questions.
All right. More questions? Hearing none, Mr. Ellis, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, just go back. Do you want to agendize that item about a letter of support, or do you believe?
The deadline is April 14th to apply for a waiver, so, yeah, I think we would have to come back to PAG, and I would say the executive director would have full discretion based on past action.
I was just gonna ask, there probably, has there ever been a time when we, as, that we haven't supported a,
Again, without looking too much into the discussion, we have always supported every project that's already in the RMAP or RTA, voter approved projects. We have previous action of the body to support this.
I didn't come in today's meeting with the idea of having the shortest PAG.
You know, I was gonna say, I'm deeply disappointed.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
We'll move on to, now.
We have Chairman Norris.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes. Chairman Peter Yucatito.
Here.
Here. And Mayor Bonta.
Here. Item P, public beyond, do I have anybody?
Mr. Chair, we do not have anyone registered to speak.
Favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. On to number 4,
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA Board. We're asking this afternoon for the RTA Board to approve resolutions 2002-001 through 2002-003, together with their associated IGAs. What we're bringing before you today are 6-month transit IGA agreements for the second half of fiscal year 2022 between the RTA and the City of Tucson for the provision of SunTran and SunVan services. We also have a third IGA which addresses extension and adjustment to costs on an IGA that we had with the town of Oro Valley. The cost of operation as identified in the proposed IGA has climbed, and this is due to increases in labor and increases in fuel and other increases, that also COVID-related expenses, from $7.30 per revenue mile in fiscal year 21 to $8.62 per revenue mile in fiscal 22, basically an 18% increase. That second half IGA matches the costs of the first half IGA, and for the first 6 months of 2022, the actual expenditures, as opposed to what we're agreeing to pay up to, was 78% of the budgeted amount. Within this considers the fares for transit continuing on a fare-free basis, and the city is using some of the CARES or CRISA funding to extend or provide some offset, basically amounting to 12% of the cost of services. And their of transit-related revenue. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move on to item 5 then. We're requesting authorization for the RTA Executive Director to negotiate contract extension terms between the RTA and Total Transit Enterprises for an extension through September 30, 2022. We had hoped to bring before you today a recommendation for award of the new transit contract. We did put out a request for proposals on December 1st of last year. We did request or did receive requests from the proposers, multiple proposers, to delay the submittal deadline because of both the holiday season and because, frankly, they're having difficulty identifying sites for the setting up their operation, and more importantly, how they would address the labor and vehicle issues, because the vehicles, as you all know, are in very short supply right now. We did receive 4 responses. We have a transit committee that has been working on evaluating them. It's a multi-jurisdictional committee. We have representation from Oro Valley, Tucson, Pima County, and the RTA staff. The review committee met multiple times, and we conducted interviews with all of the proposers on February 28th. Staff's recommending that we take additional time and ask for best and final offers. It's a common practice to go for a BAFO. We are requesting the opportunity, recommending that we do that, and requesting that we be allowed to extend the contract with Total Transit Enterprises that currently is set to expire in June through the end of September to allow for continuation of service. With that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
Mr. Chair, I know this is one that I'm particularly following, as I, talked to Farhad as well. Our paratransit community down in the outlying areas, especially Green Valley, Salarita. I don't know if it's a communication thing with Total Transit or whatever it might be, but they're feeling underserved, in the outlying areas. So I just wanted that on the record, and hopefully watching it and pay attention that whoever it is will provide a better service, especially in our area down there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll certainly look into that issue, and we'll be addressing service issues with the current.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, because of the cost of fuel and labor, are there any built-in adjustments? People come and bid on the contract at, cheap gas at $4.50 a gallon. It could be $6 in a couple of months here. California's closer to 7. But trying to bid some of these contracts to where the majority of their expense is fuel and food. Have we ever thought about trying to bid it at a current rate, but some kind of an adjustment for those issues?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Honey, you're spot on one of the things we're looking at with this particular contract. In years past, as a part of the contracts, we've required that the contractor provide their own fuel, at least on the paratransit vehicles. With the vehicles that we own, the Sun Shuttle vehicles, the minibuses, those are owned by the RTA, and we have a contract with fuel providers so that the contractor can directly fuel, and we pay for the actual cost of the fuel. So it's not a risk that is passed on onto the operator on the fixed route. On the paratransit, where they bring their own vehicles and they choose the fleet basically that they operate, we delegated the cost of fuel to them in prior contracts. We're revisiting that with this particular contract, and we'll consider the fleet that they're offering along with the cost of fuel as a part of our overall analysis of their proposals.
Move to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Item?
Okay, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA Board, we are recommending that the RTA Board appoint William Schlesinger and Andrew Quigley to at-large positions on the Citizens Accountability for Regional Transportation Committee with terms that would expire on June 30, 2026. That's basically the end of the current RTA plan. Prior to the pandemic-related restrictions, the RTA made a public call for applications to invite a pool of qualified candidates for selection to fill at-large vacancies as they occurred on the RTA cart. The call for applications was posted online and distributed through the RTA's distribution list and provided to the media. Applications were due on January 31st, 2020, and 14 applications were received. We have thus far appointed 2 members of our CART committee from that list. We provided the applicants' information blindly without connecting them to the names to the RTA CART Executive Committee, and they made a recommendation, unanimous recommendation for their first two or top candidates. They have recommended William Schlesinger and Andrew Quigley for these two positions. We have included within the staff report the application information that the applicants provided to us as a part of that application process with appropriate redactions. That, Mr. Chair, we'd recommend approval, and
No, Mr. Chair, I obviously they look very well qualified, so I make a motion to appoint committee for terms to expire June 30th.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Abstention?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, today you're being asked to consider the appointment of Karen Carl to the CAC. This would be in terms to sunset with the remaining 32 members, which is through June 30th of 2024. Her application is in the packet review, and as a quick overview, call for applications was done on February 2nd of this year to the additional members to the CAC on August Nation. The announcement was sent via email to the RTA, and the application closed on February 25th. The applications were received and
Favor?
Aye.
Nays? I'll go back. Today.
okay. Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board, I'm going to give you both a revenue update and a recommendation for setting the fiscal 23 revenue budget as we're developing our next year's transportation, or rather our TIP and RTA budget. This information that I'm going to be providing to you is a little bit updated from what you have seen in the packet. We did take deposit of funds subsequent to the issuance of the board packet. We have a March deposit, which represents collections that occurred during the month of January for the amount of $9.02 million. That's a substantial increase over the prior year, but I think what I really want to point out to you is the month prior, the collections associated with the holiday season. There's some interesting stuff happening with that. If you look at the comparison fiscal year 21 to our budget and the 22 collections to date, we're doing pretty well. Our March collection was, or representing the January funds, was $9.015 million, represented 14.1% increase in or growth from the year prior. What I want to call your attention to, though, is the February deposit, which represents our holiday season sales. We had understood going into the, or coming out of the holiday season, that sales nationally had been fairly robust. We expected to see a sizable increase. In fact, we had expected to be able to report to you this month that we had seen our first $10 million deposit. That did not happen. It came up short. Still better than last year, which was $9.5 million. We came in at $9.82 million. It was only a disappointing 3.4% growth, well less than we had been seeing through the year. We took a look at what was happening in our community to the north, in the Maricopa County area, and they experienced 22% growth year over year between the holiday season of 2020 and the holiday season of 2021. So with that, as a result of that, we did a little digging. We reached out to the Department of Revenue,
we looked at their monthly reports, and one of the things that we found was there was a sizable offset or negative deposit for the month of December in utility sales. We do not get direct information or direct access to taxpayer information. Unlike cities and towns that can go and have legal access to it, the RTA does not. So we have to rely upon inquiries made to the Department of Revenue. And what they have shared with us is that there was a Department of Revenue determination that was made relative to utility TPT taxes as they apply to manufacturing and smelting. And what they basically said was that TPT on utilities to manufacturing and smelting operations was not taxable. Further, they went so far as to say that any payee of that tax could look back and receive a reimbursement or a refund for taxes paid going back to August of 2017. So that represented, or that was taken advantage of by some major taxpayers in that sector. We do not know whether all, in fact, it was suggested to us that there may be other credits forthcoming, but it did represent about an $878,000 difference between what we had received the year prior and what we received in February for those December utility sales. So wanted to point that out to you. It was a bit of a surprise. It addresses why we did not see the growth. Had we received a normal deposit for that amount, or the amount of money that we received for the same month the year prior, we would have looked at about 12% growth year over year instead of 3.4% growth that we actually saw in our deposit. So I wanted to point that out to you. Some other things that I wanted to...
Can I just ask a question? So was that something that they were allowed to do, or they arbitrarily did it to go all the way back to 2017? Were they not supposed to be collecting it, and they were, so now they rebated, or they just decided?
That, I can't tell you the specific legal terms. I can share with you, I think it is Department of Revenue Determination 21-1. I have a copy of that. I can share that with you. I haven't gone into great detail on it, but I believe they determined that it was inappropriate to tax for that, and then they gave the businesses the opportunity to get that.
Why would it not have affected Maricopa, which would seem like they have a lot more manufacturing up there? And why didn't they have that same kind of hit?
I can't tell you that. I know that one of the things that is speculating, my expectation is that it probably has to do with the smelting side. I know that electrowinning and other copper mining related activities do consume a lot of electricity, and that may be what we're looking at. But I can't say that definitively. I don't want to pick on an industry. We have other industries that this may apply to, but I am aware that they are big consumers of
Hey, Mayor Murphy, great question. We're asking some of those things. I think the part that really got Jim excited was that we didn't hit the 10 per month.
Right.
So we started digging to see what's happening. So we're going to continue to explore the thing. Obviously, as Jim mentioned, it sounded like it was more of the after the fact decision that was made.
That's kind of why I wanted to.
And what was the basis?
Yeah, it would even allow them to do something like that.
Yeah. It also, there is a bit of a frustration on our part that we don't have the legal right to ask about that information, whereas our city and county friends have the ability to.
Sounds like a bill for the future.
It's on my wish list.
Okay. Well, if we get 10 million a month, then I think we'll be fine.
Okay.
So we may still see that the way, and one of the things that we look at is hospitality related collections. In years past, it's been very rhythmic. You know, you have a little peak in October that's associated with fall-related tourism, and then you have a big spike or it leads up to March, and then after that, it tapers off. With the pandemic, things have been very erratic. We had the little mini peak associated with all the firefighters that we put up in June. You know, who'd have thunk? We've had record-breaking restaurant and bar sales. We saw a new record in October of this last year. We may very well see, you know, additional increases as we recover from the pandemic in our tourism industry. Things are looking pretty good thus far, though. We've seen good recent anecdotal information, and we'll see what it bears out to look like as we actually take deposits. Unfortunately, I do not have yet we got the deposit, but we didn't get the backup information yet on the March deposit. So we don't know. I can't give you the analysis for January, but December has typically not been a huge month for us. November and December are actually kind of almost shoulder season, if you will, and we've seen very, very good results in both of those months of collection. So I just put that out for your information. Some other things that we're looking at are prime contracting. As Mr. Zinda mentioned, prime contracting is a big number for us. It's we can see over $1 million a month in collections. So it has ranged from over the life of the RTA from about just under 6% to over 12% of our overall annual revenues is in prime contracting, and we have seen it relatively flat. You know, it's at least in terms of the deposits, the deposits are comparable to what we were seeing well pre-pandemic. And if you were to look at the impact of inflation, it's probably less actual work than we were seeing going back into 16 and 17. So it's something that we're watching. We know that it's influenced by the availability of materials and labor, but I think that the actual volume of construction work has diminished since the early months of the in terms of our forecast history, as you know, we rely on the Eller Business and Economic Research Center to provide us information and forecasts. Our most recent forecast prior to the one that you heard about in October was in 2019, and that was the basis for our revenue budget for this current fiscal year, which was at $94.4 million. The Eller forecast was updated in October, and it actually would have adjusted the 2022 baseline estimate to $106.8 million. We are on track to exceed that, equal or exceed that based upon what we've seen. The Eller also predicted that we would see a lessening in growth next year. In fact, it would be relatively flat. As the stimulus wanes and as we start seeing the impact of changes in the credit market and other things, we're recommending that we go ahead and go forward with the Eller recommended baseline amount of a little over $107 million. It's $107.026 million. That's what we're going to be recommending that you direct us to use as our revenue budget for fiscal 23. And I think that's about all I had to really talk about. We'd like your guidance.
Questions or any comments or?
Mr. Chair, just from that hospitality, if we can just track tonight, go past. We were tracking.
Mr. Chair, as Jim mentioned, we'll bring our budget to you at the May meeting. Question we'd like to close.
Motion?
I'll move that we use that.
Aye.
Thank you, Ned. On to the next item, sir.
Okay, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA Board, I'm gonna go really quickly with this. We have a standing item, relative to the cost to complete projects. We have within your packet included the spreadsheet that we, provided to you at the last meeting, updated slightly, and I'll talk about what we've done. In the next item, you'll hear about, our recommendation for, additional funding for a number of projects. In this particular, on this particular item, we have updated, consistent with that, the Sunset Silver Bell River project. It does have an increased cost. It also has an increased amount of local funding that's being applied to that. What we're recommending is that the board authorize us to move into an IGA with Pima County for the amount of $15.163 million on that project. That is reflected in this updated funding needs analysis. That is the only significant change. It does, however, change our bottom line slightly improving it. There are other projects that we're watching that we have highlighted in yellow, and we are updating our revised funding needs to a range between $77 million and $120 million as a result of this change. This is going to continue to move. Unfortunately, I think we're going to probably see the gap start to grow again shortly as we start getting new cost estimates on projects, as we have seen quite a bit of cost increases. Anecdotally, one only needs to go to the home improvement center to see what's happening with prices, and that's also being affected or affecting us in all of the construction trades. Certainly, the cost of fuel and the cost of oil due to recent geopolitical situations will be influencing our costs to construct. We've yet to really be able to analyze it. It's still a moving issue, but as we receive additional updates, we will update this chart. With that, Mr. Chair, I have nothing else to report. Be happy to answer the questions.
The Mayor Winfield, last time we highlighted those items that you see in yellow. Those are the items that we're potentially looking at. Scope or not, that determined at this point, so those are all subject to change. Again, thanks to Mayor Winfield, he suggested last time to highlight those specific plans with an update.
I didn't have any questions on the item.
There's really no action needed on it, so it's for information, but in your direction.
Okay. All right. Mr. Chair, members of the RTA Board, we are requesting authorization from the RTA Board for the Executive Director to negotiate and execute intergovernmental agreements between the RTA and the City of Tucson, Pima County, and the Town of Marana for supplemental funding on RTA projects as recommended. We, last summer, if you'll recall, identified that there was additional funding that was available in this current fiscal year budget to address funding needs on projects where we were seeing increases in costs. We received 4 requests. We're recommending at this time 3 supplemental funding requests. The first is for Tangerine Road, Phase 2A, from Interstate 10 to 2 miles east of I-10. This is with the Town of Marana. The Town of Marana requested $12 million. We are recommending $11,245,000 of its supplemental RTA funding. The Town of Marana has also committed an initial $5 million of local funds, and the state of Arizona has programmed an additional $5 million of funding for the project through the last year's state budget. The second project is Sunset Road Phase 2, Interstate 10, east to River Road. Pima County requested supplemental funding for Sunset Road Phase 2. We have determined that due to railroad regulations, the at-grade railroad crossing for the project, which was part of the original scope of the 2006 RTA plan, is no longer feasible. The project is currently being designed with a railroad overpass with additional funding brought in by the Arizona Department of Transportation for improvements to the interchange that will allow us to bridge over the top of the railroad. There was additional federal money that was brought to bear on this project through the PAG process last summer. And we have learned from the county that they will bring $5.2 million of additional funding of their own to bear on the project for work that we've deemed beyond the scope of the original project. So with that, we're recommending that we move forward with an additional $15.163 million of supplemental funding for that project. And finally, the City of Tucson has requested supplemental funds for downtown links phases 3 and 4. We are recommending that the intergovernmental agreement be amended to award $976 of supplemental RTA funding to the project to be used for completion of eligible RTA scope cost increases. The city did request $11.6 million, so there are some differences in there, and I believe they're enumerated in the attached memo. And with that, Mr. Chair, we're recommending approval of that direction.
Mr. Chairman, I would like for the RTA to consider that we will. But I would also like to make sure that there's a continuation of the technical management, to make sure that the review is also being done by technical management. I consider a motion to approve the intergovernmental agreement with a caveat that all 3 projects be looked at fairness to the other jurisdictions by the technical management committee, that we can make sure that the conversation continues. I think the last meeting we had, Jim, you had said that the technical management committee would have an opportunity to review the project as well. So I'd like to make sure that we add that motion.
If I may, Jim, on to that. Actually, the IGAs were not meeting board authorized. Actually.
Well, I remember clearly that this particular conversation was had, and that there was going to be a review by the technical management. So, yes, we should move forward, but I feel as though that conversation should go back to the technical management so that they could add their recommendations to at least the City of Tucson. Both Marana and Pima County are receiving outside funds, federal funds and state funds, and the City of Tucson doesn't have that opportunity to get other outside funds. So I would like to make sure that we're given the benefit of the doubt and the opportunity to discuss during the technical.
We approve the requested, and as Mayor Rivera said, go back with a separate motion.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Murphy, yes, that's at your pleasure. Benjamin Road project, the RTA project, there's no federal funding on it. Allocation from that.
It says right here on the note that it's $5 million.
That's the allocation.
From the state of Arizona.
That's the allocation. Sunset project is a little bit more complicated. We're trying to coordinate with recommend this. Everyone can go back to.
I'll make that in the form of a motion.
Like to approve the first two.
Yeah, to approve the first two, if the jurisdictions are okay with moving forward with them, and especially if there's
Everybody agree with that?
I will
Then-
second.
And, I just, to add to the discussion, because I remember the last meeting, the motion, direct the director and the attorney. And I think I added sort of a caveat to that for, only for things that were authorized for expenditure by PAG and RTA.
So, yeah, but there was commentary on the table, as I recall by Jim DeCruz, that the technical management committee was going to have the opportunity to review them. So, I mean, the motion stands, but as you all remember, I had the fortune of being the representative of Ward 1 in the city of Tucson, which dealt with the downtown link from the very beginning when it was all being put together. So there's been extensive conversation about the design of downtown links. And every step of the way, RTA staff have participated in the same discussions. Some of the elements in there, especially with connectivity between neighborhood and downtown, be part of it. So I want to make sure that the conversation continues at TMC. Make sure that what has been promised and what has been worked on before historically is part of the conversation for front. No,
The first motion is to approve A and B.
A and B,
Yes.
Merrill, A and I.
You've been made on that.
So, Mr. Chairman, I actually make a motion as suggested by Mr. Mancini, forwarding the two and making sure that the one is reviewed by TMC. So it's just one motion.
Just one motion.
One.
Thought we were gonna get the second motion.
That was my understanding as well.
Yeah,
Fee.
I mean, that,
So
because
there's no fee now.
Moran and the county don't have an issue, so
Right,
we can
exactly.
just
So my
approve
motion-
ours and move forward.
That's right, my motion is to move Marana and Pima County and to review, the city of Tucson downtown lakes project at it. So it's one motion,
Then
passing forward, moving forward the Marana and Pima County and reviewing the city of Tucson.
Favor?
Aye.
Nay? For the action items, we'll move on to 7. Favor adjourned, say aye.
Aye. There's a motion and a second and an aye.
We haven't been here 4.5 hours.
That was too quick, but, that was too quick. Good job.